Hey everybody, ready for section 3 of this course covering political parties? Well, this week covers political parties, but the section at large covers primarily the institutions that we interact with when we try and engage with government and the institutions that help us better understand our government. So, as we go into this topic, I want to say congrats on wrapping up section 2 covering the three branches of government. You did that well. Don't forget the content because it will relate to a lot of these topics. In addition, it will be on our final exam. So let's get going. So, learning objectives with this week, we're going to look at political parties, the structures of them, the three collectives that make up a political party, which you are a part of as long as you are a voting citizen. We're going to look at the benefits that third parties can bring and a concept that helps us understand why third parties don't dominate American politics and why we tend to have a two-party system in the United States. In later weeks, we will be exploring some campaign structures. This will touch into some of that, but we will not be expected to remember overarching definitions of concepts like first past the post or winner takes all, but we will briefly mention them. We will also address concepts like tipping, and that is a build-up in addition to concepts like party realignment and party de-alignment, which we have experienced in the past in this course, as we have mentioned down there below. And we're going to identify some of the most notable third-party candidates we've seen in U.S. history and how they impacted some presidential elections. So before we begin, I want to address a concept that political scientists use to define leadership and our relationship with a pluralist system in the United States. And that term is either a united or a divided government. Now, a united government is not relating to the government's ability to work together on any level. It focuses on the leadership positions within the three electoral bodies within our federal government. Think of the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the presidency. A united government has one political party in the leadership positions, the majority leadership positions, within all three of these bodies. Currently, we have a united government. That is because a Republican majority holds the House of Representatives, a Republican majority holds the Senate, and the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, is a Republican Party representative. So that is a united government, having majorities in all three of these bodies led by one political party. Now, what if the Democrats in the midterm election win majority seats in the House or the Senate? Let's say the House of Representatives. The next, that if we have a House led by Democrats, a Senate led by Republicans, and a executive led by Republicans, even with them working together perfectly and no gridlock, we would still refer to this as a divided government. If we look at our past electoral structure under Joe Biden's presidency, at the last in the end of his terms, we see the Democrats did have control over the president, as Joe Biden was a identified Democratic candidate, and the Senate, as they had majority seats in the Senate. But the Republicans held majority seats within the House of Representatives, making it a divided government. It's a simple concept, but it is important to remember that this has nothing to do with our representatives' ability to work together. This is relating to party representation and majority seats within the three electoral bodies. So, what are political parties at large? For one, we have to make sure make a clear distinction between the three collectives within a political party, because we often think of political parties in some. If I know the classmates I had back in Virginia, and when I first started exploring these concepts, they always thought the classic sentiment of, well, political parties are elite politicians and those who make the decisions behind closed doors. Well, there is a lot more transparency than you may perceive or than those individuals perceived. A political party is accessible. We make up political parties. We can interact with political parties every dimension of a political party. We can see leadership structures online through their party websites. We also can access our politicians through communication, email, phone calls. So, who are political parties? Well, we see that we have the politicians that we visualize when we think of these terms of Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Independent, Green Party, whatever it may be. We also have to understand the activists. These are often those paid roles. Think of campaign managers. Think of social media marketing managers, which some of you may go to college to do. We also see the voters. That's us. As long as you're a voting citizen, that is you. Even if you change your party allegiance every election, you still represent a part of that political party during those given elections. So, what are the benefits to having political parties? Some people are dissatisfied with political party systems in the US and abroad, but we do see that there are clear benefits that they provide. One of the primary ones is they act as a shortcut for political decision making. What do I mean by that? I mean, say you are a citizen that cares a lot about one specific issue. Say you're into real estate and you care a lot about the regulations regarding that market. And that is what you will vote on because that is what will impact your life the most. Well, you will identify the candidate who aligns with your position on market regulations regarding real estate. And you may think of other issues and say they're not as important for me, but I will view my alliance with this political party as my connecting point to maybe agreeing on certain policy issues. I will be able to have a shortcut for understanding immigration laws because, well, what does my party say about immigration legislation in the United States? And then that gives you a starting point for having a shortcut for understanding political decision making processes. We also see that political parties encourage representatives from different regions of the United States to work together. I always like to use the example of imagine a Republican in the state of Montana and a Republican in the state of New York. You're going to have very different policy perspectives. A Republican in the state of Montana may have a higher preference for protecting the environment. A Republican from New York may focus more on business regulations and whatever direction they want to go on that approach. Now, having this party affiliation helps us work with people that are actually somewhat notably different when it comes to policy preferences. It gives us a starting point that is more accessible for understanding other viewpoints and creating legislation in favor of our viewpoints in government. And we also know the downstream and negative effects that political parties do bring, especially in the United States with our two-party system. And we've seen in the past, bipartisanship is on the decline since 1989, and it has gone up roughly 30%. That data point has probably increased since then, considering Gallup data and Pew Research Center's surveys. So we do know polarization is on the rise. So we also understand that political parties play a significant role in incentivizing political polarization at times, either through the sentiments of elected representatives or institutional features, which is actually the angle in which I explored political polarization when I was in graduate school. I won't dive into that to save you guys the time, as I could talk for hours about that one bullet point right there. But the structures of political parties, if you're interested, at times on an institutional level through my work and Paul Pearson, Eric Schickler. Also, we see Robert Putnam and many other social scientists exploring how our political parties as an institution has incentivized and many times also disincentivized increases in political polarization. Email me if you're interested. Otherwise, I won't take your time today. So, what are the three faces of a political party? I briefly mentioned these. You have the candidates, the activists, and the voters. Well, let's give them more political science definitions. We have the party in the electorate. This is everyone. These are the voters. These are the members of the general public who align with one political party in any given election and have the power and ability to switch affiliation within political parties. And if a large number of them have the power to create party realignments that have significant impacts in the landscape of American politics and the political party system. We also want to understand the party organization. These are the individuals that, if you look at the party websites, you can find their names, email them, but you might not be giving them the attention they deserve. These are the formal structures and leadership positions within a political party. Political party is an institution that relies on paid working individuals like any institution that has ever operated in US history. This is, I guess, another way of viewing it like a business. You need people working on every level, making sure that funding is distributed adequately, making sure that ethics are maintained within the activities of individuals, and making sure that communication is adequate among all collectives. So when you look at the party organization, these are election committees, local, state, national, executive, paid professional staff, the campaign manager, the auditor, the treasurer, whatever positions you can identify in a political party that does not represent just a voter or just a candidate. They will represent oftentimes the party organization. Those are the individuals who will receive paychecks for the duties they do. And if you go on to get a degree in political science, you get a lot of the foundations that would benefit you if you have a goal to be a part of any party organization. Then we have the party in government. These are the individuals we give our attention to. These are all the elected and appointed officials of the political parties that identify with a particular political party. Think of the classic politicians you think of today. The Donald Trump for the Republican Party, the Marjorie Taylor Greene for the Republican Party, the AOC for the Democratic Party, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Pete Buttigieg for the Democratic Party, whatever candidates you can identify, that is a representative of the party in government. Now, what are the functions of these political parties? What are their primary intentions? Well, they have the goal of course, recruiting candidates for public office and organizing and running those elections in efficient manners, in manners in which we have access for citizens to engage with the political parties and provide clarity on direction of policy going forward, and also providing citizens understanding of what party policies what issues the party represents. We also see one of the best functions of political parties is that when we have a political party that dominates, our structured political party system helps us have a institutionalized alternative to the party in government. This has been relied on throughout many governments in history that have had strong political parties as a foundation to electoral accountability when we have single party governments, when we have united governments. They also have the responsibility of accepting the responsibility for the actions they take in government. Having political parties provides us a clear roadmap for accountability. Not only can we hold the individual accountable, but we can hold their political party accountable if their political party implements policies that are destructive to our well-beings as citizens. And we also know they as I previously mentioned, act as the organized opposition to the party in power and present alternative policies to that party in power. So why do we have a two-party system? Now, this can be a bit of a conversation in the weeds, but I'm going to try and use two questions which summarize Duverger's law at large to illustrate why there is a two-party system in the United States and a struggle for any third party to really gain momentum and gain traction. So, in the United States, if you ask a voter these two questions, you might come to a clear understanding. The first is, how many votes are needed to get representation in the election you are contributing to? Now, if you think about the United States, this is where I said winner takes all may come up and first past the post. We have electoral systems in the majority of our states that give let's take the presidency, for example, they will give all of the state's electoral college votes to the candidate who has a simple majority, who may not even have a majority, who may have, if there are three candidates, may only need 30% of the vote. And we will see the threshold for representation varies. If you have a proportional representation system, sometimes that threshold can be as low as 5% to obtain some form of representation. So if your threshold to obtain any degree of representation within the federal government is 40% compared to, say, 5%, that will have notable impacts. That may impact the second question. Are people encouraged to vote honestly? So if you have to reach 40% to obtain any representation, and your true preference is a libertarian candidate, and there is a libertarian candidate in the race. There are three candidates in this race, the Democrat, Republican, and the Libertarian. But say, and this is just one example, I don't try and make these connections at large, but say the Republican candidate represents the libertarian perspective more accurately than the Democratic candidate. So you have a preference. Your preference as a voter may be libertarian first, because that is how you would vote if you had the truest vote. And then we would have a second preference for a Republican, and a last resort of a Democrat in this instance. You can switch those around however you may desire. Well, if you are that libertarian, you are incentivized to actually, if the threshold for representation is 40%, at times to vote for your second preference in order to not increase the chances of people like you who may vote for a libertarian but be also taking away votes from the Republican Party. So you will vote strategically in aims to make sure that your least favored candidate will not win the election. Went around there for a bit. I will use the next slide to explain that in a more direct way. But we also have to understand when we talk about Duverger's law and why we have a two-party system, there are some terms that often come up and are at play. Those are plurality voting and vote splitting. Plurality voting is simply whoever has the most votes wins the entirety of the representation. That's what I was mentioning with first past the post, winner takes all elections in the United States, which tend to result in the allocation of electoral college votes to one candidate, although they rarely ever win over 50% of the vote even. We also understand this concept, vote splitting. This is an action of an individual. This is when the distribution of votes among multiple similar candidates reduces the chance of winning for any of the similar candidates and actually increases the chance of winning for a dissimilar candidate. That's what I mentioned was happening within the mind of the individual. They calculated this reality that if they vote libertarian, they're taking away the votes for the more likely candidate, the Republican candidate, to win the election. So they will vote strategically with vote splitting in mind for the Republican candidate in order to decrease the chances of a dissimilar, at the example, Democratic candidate. Flip the titles however you want. Just thought I'd do that for that example. So let's look at Duverger's law on a more simple broke down level. So in the United States, we have single member districts. That is when we, within one geographically defined area, we hear discussions about redrawing district maps here and there. They tend to only happen around census years, which is every 10 years, 2020, 2030, 2040, whatever. And so we see the redrawing of these single district maps, single member district maps. That results in everybody within that geographically defined area electing one individual to represent them. Now, this is what we have utilized throughout U.S. history, but it also comes with a reality that there's a large percentage of voters within each district that do not have representation in this system. So they have to vote strategically to make sure they have the best chance of obtaining representation within their single member district. So what are the psychological effects of this? In these districts, people do not want to vote for a known loser. So they choose their second or third choice as to block their worst case scenario. That libertarian speaks to you perfectly, but you know you're a unique college libertarian student who does not have majority representation. So you know that you don't want to vote for what this definition would say is a known loser, so they would choose their second or third choice, either that Democrat or Republican, in order to block the worst case scenario, which would be either the Democrat or Republican. So we would see then this third bullet point, strategic voting. This is where the act of voting for your second or third choice to avoid an even worse case scenario occurs. This is the final end result of the questioning provided in Duverger's law. So the example is what I just provided previously. You would vote Republican instead of Libertarian to avoid a Democrat gaining seats in the legislature. That would be your example of strategic voting. Or you would vote Democrat instead of Libertarian or Green Party to avoid Republicans gaining seats. So let's talk about contemporary political parties. I've mentioned them a few slides ago, Democrats and Republicans. But let's create a foundational starting point in which we can view Democrats and Republicans on an institutional level with respect. That also pulls from their traditional foundations that we addressed in a previous lecture on liberalism and conservatism. So contemporary political parties, we see Democrats within the United States tend to have a heavier emphasis on national social programs with an intention for providing social protections on a federal level. We see Social Security on an economic level, unemployment, welfare, Medicaid, and more. So these are generally understood as we also addressed previously, talking about liberalism, a focus that the role of the state is to provide positive well-being and greater well-being for their citizens. And the Democrats take that approach by providing these protections and resources on the federal level. This collective also tends to align with the identities of environmentalist collectives, although that tendency in Montana is not as predictable as you may see in other eastern states within the United States. You see they tend to live in urban environments. There's a great work that studied the case study of Wisconsin, and it's a work by Catherine Kramer. I think the book is titled Rural Consciousness. I read a lot of those. I forget the titles. It's been a couple years. But she explored our urban and rural divide and how it's a predictor for Democratic and Republican voting tendencies and are a better way to understand political polarization in the United States than simply viewing it as liberal conservative or Democrat or Republican. A very unique argument and fascinating in how she applied a lot of evidence to support her claims. We also see LGBTQ communities tending to align with Democrats, and they tend to maintain traditionally liberal perspectives, pulling from the works of John Locke and many theorists of that time. Now, these are generalizations. You may be a Democrat who looks very different than this slide depicts you. And that is the reality that within the United States, our party representation is defined within individuals. You have the ability to vary on any of these issues. And I am not dictating what you are as a Democrat or Republican, but giving us a starting point of clear understanding through policy perspectives as well. We see Republicans. We also see with the Republican Party a focus more so on traditional values and institutions, maintaining of these past institutions. We see the works of Edmund Burke, as I mentioned in the Ideologies and Philosophies lecture, and how he focused on the sentiment that we have inherited the progress of our past generations through the traditions and institutions that they have passed down to us. And we see that maintained through a lot of sentiments within the Republican Party. We see this. We see alliances with the identities of religious groups in the United States, rural communities, as I mentioned with that Catherine Kramer work. Nationalism has been measured on to be increasing in representation within the Republican Party, and as the past example maintained, we do see a lot of libertarian tendencies within the Republican Party, as they both have a foundational sentiment of limitations of government is a better approach for government. Although we do understand that when we look at contemporary parties, we see that applied differently. Of course, Republicans have a tendency to be affiliated with conservatives, and again, the representation of policies within these political parties shift with each elected representative and with each generation. We do see in contemporary Republican parties an expansion of the role of the federal government, mirroring a lot of those Democratic policies, but focused more so on other angles, not aligning with the Social Security or unemployment, welfare, Medicaid sentiments, but more so focusing on the federal government's role in institutions like immigration through expansion of ICE facilities and capacities, and through expanding the role of the FCC through regulation and various roles like that. But we do see the Democratic and Republican parties founded in these characteristics and develop with each term. So let's talk about the less inflammatory political parties in the United States, those third parties. Those which we oftentimes do not see on a notable level during presidential elections, particularly presidential debates, but we do see on some legislative levels and state levels in particular representation. And we will look later on at how some campaign and electoral processes can open the door for more third party representation and dismantle some of those foundations evident through Duverger's law. So, third party candidates in the US have a historical ability to impact elections significantly. We'll look at three primary third party candidates and how they impacted the general political environment and the landscape at large. We also see that third parties represent minority positions within government that are oftentimes overlooked and overshadowed, although there is a notable percentage of the population maintaining that sentiment. Think of socialist economic policies, libertarian approaches to government, communist sentiments at time, and we'll see that vary. We could look at the great power competition and the role of communism in that later on in the course if we have time. And we also see extreme interpretations of mainstream positions represented in minority parties, in third parties. So this can oftentimes, we see another example in recent years. I don't use this in our PowerPoint, but you can reference RFK Jr. representing the sentiment that a large percentage of the population had against our food supply and the health that is present in our general food supply and health systems. And that created large scale impacts as that sentiment was adopted by the contemporary Republican Party, as RFK Jr. is now a significant member of Donald Trump's cabinet. So we see third party representatives, even if they do not win the election, can have significant impact, revealing minority positions and representing them within government later on if they become a member of a party cabinet or win a legislative election. We also see that term we've mentioned a couple times in this course, pluralism, because what we are is a pluralist system. We are a system of government in which there are multiple parties and groups vying for power within this single society. And in the end game, we have to coexist with majority rule and minority protections. So let's look at three of the most notable third party candidates and how they represent the powers of third party candidates throughout US history. We look back at 1912 at Theodore Roosevelt, one of the only of these three third party candidates who did eventually become the president. We see in 1912 he ran the Progressive Party and won the largest percentage of the vote than any president in U.S. history, in any third-party candidate in U.S. history. Apologies, as he obtained 27.4% of the popular vote. This resulted in, well, not him winning the election, but Woodrow Wilson, as the presence of Theodore Roosevelt resulted in ticket splitting and opened the door for Woodrow Wilson to win the 1912 election. We fast forward a bit throughout history and we see 1968, in which we see a period in which I've mentioned before, but a period of party realignment. This presidential election revealed a schism within the Southern Democratic political party, which created a shift that would persist until today. Although the policy issues debated at the time have not persisted today, as the issue at the time was segregation. George Wallace was well known as being the governor of, I believe it was, I get this mixed up, Mississippi or Alabama, prior to running as a third party candidate. But in this role, he was a part of a very notable picture in U.S. history, as we had the desegregation of our public schools. But we had George Wallace as a persistent individual pushing back against the desegregation of public schools. And there was a famous photo of the National Guard protecting a young black student's right to enter the public school, although George Wallace stood at the front of the school with his arms crossed, refusing to allow the student to go in. But thanks to our executive deployment of the National Guard, that student was able to safely enter school and obtain education and create a schism, a impact in American politics, opening doors for a large percentage of the population to obtain education that they were not previously obtaining. Now, George Wallace, after that moment in U.S. history, decided he wanted to run for president and represented those within the United States who were advocates for segregation policies. And those were 13.5% of the general population. Now, he did not win the election, but instead, through the action of ticket splitting, opened the door for Richard Nixon to win the presidency and created a party realignment as those Southern Democrats at the time left the Democratic Party, voted with George Wallace in 1968, and after aligning with George Wallace, later aligned with the Republican Party and created a new shift within our two-party political system within the United States, led by George Wallace's contribution as a third-party candidate. We also remember our parents' third-party candidate, or some of our great third-party candidate, Ross Perot, 1992, representing the Reform Party. He came into this election advocating for the sentiment that we need a more moderate political party to represent the middle of the two extremes of our Democratic and Republican parties, really representing this sentiment of reform, calling for more moderation in federal governance. Now, he opened the door after obtaining more than George Wallace, 18.9% of the popular vote, opened the door for Bill Clinton to win the election in 1992. Now, we mentioned this before and in the past in this class, party realignment. We're going to explore additional ways that political party landscapes change, but I do want to start with party realignment as I just mentioned. So we remember George Wallace and his campaign for presidency, in which he pulled 13.5% of the general population away from predominantly the Democratic Party, but not exclusively, which represents a large number of voters who changed party identification. One election voted for a third party, but eventually shifted their party preference to the opposing political party, the Republican Party. That is the most clear example of party realignment in the United States. Now we also see party de-alignment. This is a much briefer period, at least in U.S. history. It's only been represented through brief periods, but this is when a substantial number of voters do not identify with either of the two primary parties. Now we see this in the same example I just mentioned, that brief period when 13.5% voted for George Wallace. That represented a period of party de-alignment, similarly to Ross Perot's election, in which he obtained that notable percent, and Theodore Roosevelt's. Now, what are other ways in which the political party landscape can change beyond having large-scale voter shifts? Well, one, we can have significant party landscape changes led by notable candidates. We see in recent history no examples better than the examples of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump in federal American politics. Unique candidates obtaining a large percentage of popular vote can reveal a segment of the population that often feels underrepresented. When I made this slide, I was referencing the early sentiments of Donald Trump as he called for the drain the swamp sentiments, appealing to a large percentage of the population, while Bernie Sanders has a similar sentiment, focusing on the pushback of the powers of the 1% in the United States and the ability for us to push back against that with economic redistributive policies. And we see another and continuations of this discussion through the lens of Donald Trump once he has obtained the leadership position within the party as the head of the executive, the president of the United States. We've seen a shift in a lot of policy approaches, a focus more so on certain issues like immigration and certain practices like utilizing ICE in the United States to obtain the end goal of better immigration policies, representing a heightened focus of that within the political party, in addition to other approaches that were not traditionally maintained in the past, just like Bernie Sanders would do if he was the leader of the Democratic Party at any given time. Now, there is one other term I would like to reference in relations to how political parties change. That is the term tipping. Now, this is when a group is growing in size over time and grows so large that this simple growth of this single group has ability to shift and impact the political balance of a district, state, or county. Now, the best example I could give is one that I always pull from a old Netflix documentary, which every semester less and less of you have ever heard of. But I think it's something like Wild Wild Country or something along that nature, Wild Wild something. And it's a cult that originated in India. They all wear orange. I don't know if you remember it, if you've seen it in the past couple years old. But they moved to a small town in Oregon. And in that small town in Oregon, they started as a small collective. But over time, they kept growing in size, kept recruiting successfully. And over time, this small collective that bought a farm and was just those oddballs out in the corner of the country became a part of the local government. They became a larger percentage of the voting population than the previous population that lived there prior, as it was also a county that was experiencing a decrease in their population. So tipping is when a group grows in size independently, so great to the point where it has a shift and impact on the political balance of a district, state, or country. So what did we learn today? Here are the bullet points. I always tell you, go through them, pause it, make sure you read it and answer it to yourself. Make sure these answers are correct for you. And we do have more today, so let's make sure we keep going. I also want to tell you guys how to write your midterm paper, give you some guiding points. So the assignment summary right here, I will just read it to you. You must write the first page of your term paper and submit it as your midterm. This acts as the introductory paper for your term paper later on, and your submission must consist of a full page of text, must include a clear thesis statement, an indication of the structure of your paper, a single source. Later, you will need 5, but we need to have at least 1 source. Formatting will not be too important, but we will care about that on the final. A clear reason for writing this paper. You must also write in complete sentences with clear and proper grammar, respect for the content you are writing about. Do not use foul language. I don't care how you talk. I don't talk poetically at times, I guess you could say, but this is a college paper. There is no place for you to drop some bombs or whatever it is you think. Be a professional. I've had too many papers in the past that were just lacking seriousness. And the role of our government in regulating our lives is serious enough for us to try and address it seriously through a professional paper. So, continuing, your paper must rely on empirical observations instead of normative ones. I will describe that very briefly right now. Empirical is like saying, this is true because of this data point. It is founding statements and claims with data, evidence, and citations. A normative claim is one that relies on your perspective. It says, I saw this one day. I know that in my community, people feel this way. Nobody cares about what you feel or experienced in a political science paper, as my professors have said to me in the past. Instead, we care about what society is doing, how it impacts us, and the objective truth underlying these institutions and things that can at times be so frustrating for citizens or empowering for citizens. So be objective, use empirical observations founded in citations, fact, and analysis instead of citations, fact, and data, not analysis. Normative ones rely on, I guess you could say, your individual analysis, perspective, viewpoints, beliefs, whatever it may be. No normative claims in this paper. Now, here's a list of the requirements. I'm not going to ramble on and list these, but make sure you meet all of these requirements. This is how I will be grading your midterm submission. And trust me, it's pretty easy to meet these requirements as long as you just go through them one by one and give them the respect they deserve and write your paper about something that you care about. So let's address the elephant in the room. I'm asking you to write a paper in 2025 when you have the ability to use a tool called ChatGPT to write that paper in a second. Well, I will be able to catch this. Something you may not know about me. My side gig is training large language models on political science literature. I know the language and vocabulary that large language models use, and I have the ability to identify it better than many professors you have had in your past. So do not try, but instead you can use this as a tool because AI is a tool, not the performer itself. So we can use AI to brainstorm the structure of our argument. Say you want to write about political polarization, but all you know about it is what we've covered in this course, which is inadequate to address a paper like that. So what you could do is ask ChatGPT for a starting point. Hey, can you help me understand the ways to measure political polarization in the United States that political scientists have used? Make sure you use terms like added sentences, like make sure this is what political scientists use. What is a empirical way of approaching this issue? Help yourself by using it as a tool to better understand concepts, but do not ask it to help you write out your presentation of an opinion. Do use it to brainstorm paper topics at large. Say you are struggling with the topic you chose and you want to find a new one and you have things that you care about, ask ChatGPT, how can I address my care for whatever it is, immigration, the environment, trees, and in a political science paper in the year 2025. So those are great ways to use AI, but ways to not use AI are by I do not use identify don't use AI to identify sources. Don't use it to blindly identify sources. You can use it to get a large list and then you can independently check them. But AI has a tendency to use Reddit and opinion pieces as sources, which are not adequate in political science literature. Do not use AI to make your paper seem more sophisticated. I don't care if you don't know how to use big words. I learned how to talk in a Southern public school, so it does not matter in this classroom. I want you to be able to work out how you present the issues at hand, not how you use fancy words. And also, word Word, what we use through Microsoft, has a synonyms power, which gives you a list of like 5 words. If you really want to get sophisticated and have some synonyms that make you sound a little better, do that over instead of asking AI to restructure a sentence. AI has one way of talking, and it is very clear, and I will notice. And I'll notice if you use it for just a few sentences too. Don't do that. Do not use AI to write the content of your paper, obviously. Excessive use of AI will be viewed as you showing immense disrespect for me, the course, and the content, because writing this paper is us going on a journey together to better understand this course, this concept, and this content. I could choose one paper topic to give everyone and make it very easy for me to grade these papers. Instead, I want to empower you as citizens. I want you to write a paper on what you believe is the most important thing in this government. There have been college papers that students have written and that has resulted in amendments that we will learn about later on in this course, actually, the 27th Amendment. But I want to give you the opportunity to do something like that. Take an idea and a belief, a way of feeling about government, and begin writing about it in an empirical way. And maybe it can be the first step to you changing the world. Or maybe it could be a way for you to cheat through this class and get caught. So don't do that. Do not use AI. Respect the course, the content, myself, and yourself, as this is what can change and guide our lives. So here's my advice. Here's where I actually give you some kind pointers on how to write this paper. So when you write your term paper, midterm, at large, this is primarily focused on how to write your introduction. I want you to focus on 3 goals in your introduction. Tell me what the topic is. What is the issue? Not just like, I'm talking about polarization. Okay, what is polarization? I'm talking about the tendency for Democrats and Republicans to disagree that has been measured in the United States and is on a rapid increase as we have had blank percentage increase in polarization in the United States. Tell me objectively what the issue is through an empirical mindset. You can do this in 2 to 3 sentences. Now, sometimes I know it can be hard to understand how deep of a dive you should take in your 2 to 3 sentences, but again, if you're towards the end of that 3rd sentence and you're starting to ramble on and throw a lot of ends and whatever, maybe just cut down the detail and tell me as simply and directly as if it was conversational why this issue is real, why it matters, and how we're going to address it. Second, once you've told me what the issue is, I want you to tell me why the topic, why this is the topic you are exploring and why it's important. You can do this in just 1 to 2 sentences, no more, no more. And this is where it is hardest to be empirical, but you have the highest requirement to being so. 1 to 2 sentences identify the severity of your topic, or in other words, tell the reader why they should care about what you have to say. Do not say anything about your personal experience. People do not care about topics because you had a bad day one day and saw this person or this happened or your family or this or that. No, that's not why other people should care. Other people should care because this issue impacts people. People that could be them, people that could be their neighbor, it could be their loved one. It impacts people and citizens of the United States. And third, indicate how your paper will address the issue by identifying 2 to 4 variables. I always say 3 is the lucky number. 3 variables at play. What do I mean by that? Think of it like identify subtopics that influence your overarching topic. It's like, you know, it's sunny today. Well, a variable would be the clouds. A variable would be other things that influence the sun, nighttime, whatever. So think of it like political polarization. Your variable, if your topic is increases in political polarization, well, your variables would be the tendency for the actions of elected representatives, the role of political parties as an institution, the role of the media as an institution, the role of civil society and positive political discourse, whatever it is. Whatever issues at play, whatever variables, subtopics you will dive into in the body of your paper to illustrate your overarching topic. Now, if you can summarize this 3rd point in a single sentence that ties in the issue at hand, less of a focus on why it matters, but you tie in the issue at hand and how you're going to address it, that is a thesis statement. Exploring the dimensions of political parties the media, and elected representatives will better indicate the influence that political polarization has on civil society and why it has increased so rapidly in recent years. That is a poor thesis statement, but a starting point. Just an example off the top of my head. So, if you follow these general goals and you let them take up an entire paper, you add in a sentence or two presenting more essential information, you stay empirical, you make sure that none of your introduction focuses on your perspective, but instead all of our perspective and data. You will do great. Additional recommendations, JSTOR.org, no E, JSTOR.org, is a database of non-biased, peer-reviewed articles. They will take a wide range of arguments on a wide range of issues, and they address everything from microbiology, immunology, to political science and sociology. So what I recommend, you go to this website, you have access through this website through your college, so you would have to log in using your college email, so make sure you use that. Also, if you email me or communicate with me, please use your college email. I don't like talking to Yahoo and Gmail because, well, it doesn't go through all the time, and that can be a problem on my end. So, JSTOR.org, search your keywords, political polarization. If that's your topic and your subtopics are parties, the media, search all those terms together, search them one by one, and you can use filters to isolate sources only from recent years. And that is the best way to get a source, a peer-reviewed source. And it's really a great way to understand how you should take up your argument. Because what you're doing is you're researching how other researchers, graduate students, professors, institutions, think tanks have explored these issues at hand through studies that have been not only practiced and applied once, but are mimicked over and over again to ensure their efficacy by other researchers. That is how we get peer reviewed, and that is how we get a database of data points that are more reliable than any publication on the majority of the news networks. And when news networks get definitive claims, this is oftentimes where they obtain them from. It's these studies where they have that one objective data point that they're referencing in their article. So make sure you use peer-reviewed sources in your paper, and JSTOR is the best place to look for your first source. Also, use Grammarly.com or similar programs. I know Grammarly has expanded to use a lot of AI, but if you use it strictly to help you improve your grammar without those excessive paid subscriptions that alter your text significantly, just make sure you're spelling words correctly. That's what you should use Grammarly for. Commas and spelling. That's it. Don't use it beyond those two means. So be wary of any AI and significant shifts in your writing structure, but use it to catch grammatical and spelling mistakes. And here are the requirements for that final paper due at the end of the semester. I will be happy to meet with you via Zoom, but my intentions to discuss your papers or anything, but my intentions with this midterm and final paper is that when you give me the midterm, I'm going to grade it light. I'll grade it based on those requirements, but they're pretty easy to meet. Even if you submit a bad paper, you can meet those requirements. But I will give you a million comments. I am going to tear your paper to shreds and try and indicate the direction you should go in writing your term paper. I'm doing this not because I want you to feel bad, but because I want you to give you a roadmap for improvement and take the things I've learned throughout my degrees and help you apply them early on in your journey. I do this because I remember when I got back, the vast majority of any essays I've written in college, I got them towards the last day of class. And I had little to no regard as to what the comments were on how I can improve my paper. This is my way of making you care about the comments I make and making the process of writing a term paper a lot easier on you, as I'm here to help you through my comments on your midterm. So take your midterm seriously. Give me something that is a true starting point of what you're going to write your term paper on, and I will make that term paper so much easier for you through detailed guided comments. Now, with that being said, know that it might take a while to get all the grades back on the midterm. Um, as long as you submit it, your grade will be fine. You will not have significant deductions for any small errors within the document as long as the document has a citation and a full page of text. So just make sure you meet those general requirements. You'll be good. Relax on the grade you'll get and just be waiting those detailed comments to then take and build upon to write your term paper in the end. But all right, guys, thank you. What's due this week? I don't have one of those slides prepared, but it is the midterm. The midterm is due this week. That's clear. You guys know this. We also have our discussions, as we will have every single week, and our readings along with our lecture. So please make sure you're giving me the time, because I spent all this time yelling at the laptop by myself. I wish there was somebody here to ramble on with, for one, so I can understand how you guys are taking the content and make sure we understand this clearly. But yeah, thank you guys for listening to me talk to my screen. Have a good one.